It wasn't just a roof, it was my last breath of hope, Ilara whispered, as the icy wind of the medieval mansion swept centuries of dust over her starving grandchildren. The cracked walls seemed to mock her misery, and every shadow hid a secret. But as she touched the old, frayed tapestry, a shiver ran down her spine. There was something behind it, something that pulsed with a forgotten promise, and that was about to change her family's destiny forever. Ilara felt her heart quicken, a strange new rhythm in her tired chest, like a muffled drum announcing something imminent. Her aged fingers, calloused by a life of deprivation, traced the worn threads of the tapestry, feeling the rough texture and the cold dampness emanating from the stone wall. The something that pulsed was not an audible sound, but a deep sensation, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate in her very soul, almost an ancestral call. Her eyes, accustomed to the constant gloom of that forgotten place, tried in vain to penetrate the darkness behind the heavy fabric. She pulled with what little strength she had left, but the tapestry seemed glued to the stone, heavy and resistant, as if guarding a secret for centuries, refusing to reveal its truth. "Grandma?" Leo's small, weak voice, her 6-year-old grandson, cut through the oppressive silence of the hall, pulling Ilara back to the harsh, relentless reality. The boy, with large, hungry eyes, huddled with his 4-year-old sister Clara near the dying fire that barely warmed the icy air, was trembling. His lips were blue. "It's very cold, Grandma, and my stomach hurts from hunger." Ilara's chest tightened painfully. The forgotten promise, the mystery behind the tapestry could wait. Her grandchildren's hunger and cold could not. That was the heaviest burden she carried. She turned, a forced, trembling smile on her lips, and knelt beside the children, embracing them with all her strength. "It will pass, my loves. Grandma will find something to warm you and for us to eat." But with each word, uncertainty weighed like a stone in her soul. The mansion, with its endless corridors, broken windows that let the wind howl, and dancing shadows, seemed like a stone monster, mocking her misery and swallowing what little hope they had left. That night, as Leo and Clara finally slept, nestled together under a thin, patched blanket, their small hearts beating in sync, Ilara couldn't close her eyes. The thought of the tapestry wouldn't leave her. It was a beacon in the darkness of her despair. That something was the only thing preventing her from completely succumbing to hopelessness. At dawn, with the first pale rays of sun timidly peeking through the cracks in the walls, painting the dust in golden hues, she rose, her body aching and stiff from the night's cold, but her mind focused and her soul driven by a new determination. "Stay here by the fire, my little angels," she said, kissing each of their foreheads, feeling Clara's feverish skin. "Grandma's going to explore a little more. I promise I won't go far." With an improvised torch made of dry branches and rags, Ilara returned to the wall where the tapestry hung. The fabric, with its faded designs of knights and ladies from a long-forgotten era, seemed even more imposing and mysterious in the flickering light. She tried again, this time with more force, pushing and pulling with all her energy. Her muscles protested, a silent cry of pain, but her determination, fueled by love for her grandchildren, was greater than any weariness. Slowly, with a muffled, ghostly creak that echoed through the empty hall, the lower edge of the tapestry gave way slightly, revealing a dark, narrow crack in the stone wall. The air that escaped the crack was damp and musty, laden with the unmistakable scent of ancient earth and imprisoned time. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine, a strange mix of fear and an almost youthful excitement. It was a passage, no doubt. But where would it lead? And what awaited her inside, in the depths of that centuries-old structure? Ilara's heart pounded, no longer from paralyzing dread, but from audacious curiosity. Her grandchildren depended on her for everything, and this discovery, however frightening, could be the answer to her silent prayers, the key to a future she barely dared to dream of. She knelt, the torch trembling slightly in her hand, trying to peer through the crack. The darkness was total, impenetrable, an abyss of mystery. Ilara knew she couldn't enter without first ensuring the children's safety and well-being. The responsibility weighed heavily, but hope, once a small, fragile flicker, now burned with a more intense and resilient flame within her. She needed more light, perhaps a tool to open the passage completely. The mansion, which had once seemed like a cold, inescapable prison, now revealed itself as a labyrinth of hidden possibilities. Ilara took a deep breath, feeling the cold stone against her wrinkled skin, but also the promise of something new. The adventure was just beginning, and she knew that every step would be taken out of the unwavering love she felt for Leo and Clara, her last treasures. Ilara stepped back from the dark crack, her heart still pounding, but her mind already returning to her little treasures. The hidden promise was powerful, yes, but the feverish heat on Clara's forehead, Leo's dry cough, and the emptiness in their stomachs were more urgent. She clutched the improvised torch and hurried back to where the children awaited her. Clara was paler, her eyes half closed and her breathing labored. Leo, despite his hunger, tried to cover his sister with the thin blanket, a gesture of affection that broke Ilara's heart. "Grandma, Clara is hot," he said, his voice choked, pointing to the girl's forehead. Ilara knelt quickly, the touch of her wrinkled hand on Clara's feverish skin, confirming her worst fears. The fever had risen. "My little angels, Grandma will find something for you," she murmured, hugging them tightly, feeling the penetrating cold of the mansion contrast with Clara's sickly warmth. She needed blankets, food, a stronger fire. The crack, the passage, now seemed a distant luxury, a promise she might never fulfill if she didn't secure her grandchildren's lives first. With new urgency, Ilara began to search the hall, her eyes scrutinizing every corner. Shadows danced, but Ilara ignored the fear. She opened old, dusty chests, finding only moth-eaten rags and pieces of rotten wood. Every empty drawer, every desolate shelf was a blow to her already fragile hope. Despair threatened to swallow her. Suddenly, her fingers brushed against something heavy and cold under debris near a disused fireplace. It was an old wrought-iron lantern, covered in thick dust and cobwebs. Beside it, a small metal container with oil. With trembling hands, Ilara tried to open it. The mechanism was stuck, but with determined effort she twisted the lid. The oil, though old, seemed usable. A flicker of hope ignited in her chest. She returned to her grandchildren, a tired but genuine smile illuminating her face. "Look what Grandma found," she said, showing them the lantern. Leo's eyes widened, a spark of curiosity replacing his hunger for an instant. Ilara carefully managed to light the wick. A steady yellowish light filled the small circle around them, dispelling some of the darkness and psychological cold. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Now for the fire, Ilara thought, feeling the need for more warmth for Clara. She remembered dry branches and fallen leaves in a more secluded corner of the hall. With the lantern in hand, she ventured out again. The light revealed details that the improvised torch had hidden: a small pile of damp but still usable firewood, and, to her surprise, an old wool blanket rolled up and hidden under a loose floorboard. The blanket was dirty and smelled of mold, but it was thick and seemed intact. Ilara picked it up carefully, feeling its rough but comforting texture. Her eyes welled up. It was a sign, a small blessing amid so much desolation. She hurried back to the children, her heart slightly more hopeful. "Look, my loves, a warm blanket for Clara." She wrapped the girl in the blanket, feeling relief as she saw the small body snuggle in. The fever was still there, but the warmth would help. Leo nestled beside his sister, the warmth of the wool and the light of the lantern bringing a little comfort. While the children warmed themselves, Ilara dedicated herself to rekindling the fire with the firewood she had found. With the lantern's light, she could see better, and with patience, the flames danced again, stronger and more welcoming. The smell of smoke and burning wood filled the air, bringing a sense of home, however precarious. There was still hunger, but Ilara felt she had won a small battle. The lantern, the blanket, the stronger fire. They were small miracles. The secret passage still called to her, but now she had a few more resources and, more importantly, renewed inner strength. Her love for her grandchildren was her compass, and every small victory was a reminder that human resilience could flourish even in the deepest ruins. She looked at the crack, the darkness still impenetrable, but now with the promise that soon she would return. Ilara looked at the dark crack, the promise of something more pulsing in her chest, but her eyes soon turned to Leo and Clara. The girl's fever was still a burning ember under the wool blanket, and Leo's weak cough echoed in the silence of the hall. The lantern cast a circle of yellowish light, a small sanctuary against the mansion's gloomy vastness, but it couldn't ward off the hunger gnawing at their stomachs. The secret passage was a distant hope, her grandchildren's lives, a palpable urgency. My loves, Grandma is going to look for some water and, who knows, something for us to eat, Ilara said, her voice trying to sound firmer than she felt. Leo nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire's flame, seeking comfort. Clara whimpered softly, her face flushed with fever. Ilara kissed their foreheads again, feeling the sickly warmth, and stood up, her body protesting with every movement. With the lantern in one hand and determination in her heart, Ilara began to explore the areas adjacent to the main hall. Each step raised clouds of ancient dust, and the heavy air seemed to whisper forgotten stories. She opened creaking doors that revealed empty rooms, with furniture covered by ghostly sheets or completely disintegrated by time. With each door, hope diminished, replaced by a chilling discouragement. In a side corridor, almost hidden by a pile of rubble, Ilara noticed a small wooden door, sturdier than the others. It looked like a pantry or a cellar. With considerable effort, she pushed, and the old wood groaned, yielding with a drawn-out creak. The smell from within was different, not just mold, but a faint, earthy, almost fresh scent. The lantern's light revealed a small chamber, surprisingly dry compared to the rest of the mansion. On the stone shelves, covered by a thin layer of dust, there were some empty ceramic jars, but, to Ilara's surprise, one of them was intact, and upon lifting it, she felt the unmistakable weight of water. Water. Her eyes welled up with gratitude. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Beside the jars, hidden under some old cloths, she found a small leather pouch. With trembling hands, Ilara opened it. Inside, there were some dried apples and a handful of nuts, a treasure forgotten by time. It was little, but it was food. A wave of relief swept over her body, dissipating some of the weight she carried. She hurried back to the hall, her heart beating with new hope. "Look what Grandma found," she exclaimed, showing them the jar of water and the pouch of food. Leo sat up, his eyes shining. Ilara gave him and Clara some water, watching them drink eagerly. Then, carefully, she offered the dried apples and nuts, small portions that, for her starving grandchildren, were a feast. Clara's face, though still feverish, seemed to relax a little as she chewed slowly. Leo, with a weak smile, hugged his grandmother. "Thank you, Grandma. You're the best." The boys' simple words were a balm to Ilara's tired soul. With their stomachs a little fuller and the warmth of the fire and blanket, the children seemed more comfortable. Ilara felt immense relief. Clara's fever still worried her, but the water and food were crucial victories. She knew she would need more, but for now, they were safe. As she watched her grandchildren fall asleep again, nestled together, Ilara allowed herself a moment of rest. The lantern flickered, and shadows danced on the walls, but they no longer seemed so threatening. Her eyes turned to the dark crack in the wall, the promise of the secret passage. Now, with her grandchildren a little more stable, curiosity and hope once again propelled her. She needed more resources, perhaps medicine, and that passage was the only chance. She knew that morning would bring the courage needed to unravel what lay beyond that crack for the future of her small family. Morning arrived, bringing with it a pale veil of light that barely managed to push back the darkness from the mansion's deepest corners. Ilara watched Leo and Clara, asleep under the wool blanket, their childlike faces a little more serene after the small meal and the warmth of the fire. Clara's fever, though still present, seemed to have subsided a little, a small relief that warmed the grandmother's heart. It was now or never. The secret passage called to her, and the promise of a better future for her grandchildren was the fuel that propelled her tired steps. Careful not to wake them, Ilara stood up. The lantern, which had been a blessing the night before, was beside her, and she lit it again, the yellowish flame dancing and casting elongated shadows across the walls. She needed something to force open the crack, something sturdier than her own hands. Her eyes scanned the hall, searching for any object that might serve. Near the disused fireplace, where she had found the lantern, a robust, charred piece of wood, which seemed to have been part of a beam, caught her attention. It was heavy, but it could be useful. With an effort, she dragged it to the tapestry wall. Ilara's heart pounded with a mix of apprehension and hope as she approached the crack. The tapestry, now partially pulled aside, revealed the dark opening, an invitation to the unknown. She positioned the piece of wood in the crack, feeling the roughness of the stone and the damp smell emanating from within. With all the strength she could muster in her aged body, she pushed and leveraged. The sound of stones scraping against stone echoed through the hall, a prolonged and eerie creak that seemed to come from the very bowels of the mansion. The crack yielded, widening enough for a person to pass through, revealing an even denser darkness. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It was a tunnel, narrow and low, with rough stone walls and a ceiling that seemed to press down. The lantern barely managed to penetrate the total darkness that stretched ahead. Cold, stagnant air, laden with the smell of earth and mold, enveloped her. She hesitated for an instant, the fear of the unknown tightening her chest. What if there were dangers, creatures? But the image of Leo and Clara's pale faces, Clara's fever, the hunger they felt, propelled her forward. She could not retreat. With the lantern held aloft, Ilara knelt and with difficulty began to crawl into the passage. The cold, damp stone brushed against her clothes and skin, and the space was so tight she could barely move her shoulders. Every inch felt like an eternity. The tunnel snaked, and the lantern's light danced on the walls, revealing cobwebs and small insects fleeing the brightness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breath and the rustle of her clothes against the stone. She wondered how many people had passed through there before her, and for what reason. The passage seemed to have been forgotten for centuries, a secret kept in the depths of that structure. Suddenly, the passage began to widen slightly, and the ceiling rose a little, allowing Ilara to kneel and then stand, though still stooped. The smell of mold gave way to a more metallic aroma, almost of wet earth and old iron. Advancing with more confidence, Ilara noticed that the tunnel walls changed. They were no longer rough stone, but more worked masonry, though still ancient and damp. The lantern's light revealed something on the floor that made her stop abruptly. It was a small metal object corroded by time, but with a distinct shape. She bent down, picking it up with trembling hands. It was a small, ornate key with an almost illegible crest engraved on it. Ilara's heart leaped. A key. For what door? For what secret? The discovery gave her new breath. This was not just a tunnel, it was a path to something. With the key firmly clutched in her hand, Ilara continued, her eyes now more attentive, searching for any other sign. The passage began to descend gently, and the air grew denser, but also fresher. With each step, the hope that she was on the right path, that she would find the solution to her grandchildren's misery, grew within her. She felt she was approaching something, a place where the history of the mansion and her own family would be revealed. The lantern's glow, once just a point in the darkness, now seemed like a guide, leading her deeper into the heart of the mystery. Ahead, she saw a faint sliver of light, different from her lantern, that seemed to come from a larger opening. Ilara saw, ahead, a faint sliver of light that seemed to come from a larger opening. Her heart, already quickened by the newly discovered key, pounded intensely. What mystery lay hidden behind that glow? Would it be an exit or another empty room? Hope mingled with fear, an ancient dance Ilara knew well. She clutched the ornate key in her hand, feeling the cold metal, like an amulet propelling her forward. With slow, cautious steps, Ilara advanced. The crack ahead grew, revealing that the passage ended in a stone wall, where a dark wooden door stood ajar. The air coming from within was drier and less musty, with a faint scent of old wood and something that evoked reverence. She stopped before the door. She pushed it carefully, and the old wood groaned softly, opening to reveal a circular chamber. Surprisingly well preserved, it was not a room of glittering treasures, but an ancient library or study. Dark wooden shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with dusty books. In the center, a large oak table covered in thick dust, but still imposing. Light filtered from a skylight in the ceiling, illuminating the dancing dust and creating a golden halo. Her eyes scanned the place, marveling. Each book seemed to whisper stories. With a sigh, Ilara approached the table. Beneath the dust, there were stacks of yellowed papers, some tied with faded ribbons. And in the center, as if waiting for her, a small, intricate chest, made of dark wood with metal details covered in cobwebs. The chest had no visible lock, but Ilara noticed a small recess in the lid. With a premonition, she raised the key she had found. It was the same shape, the same engraved crest. With trembling hands, Ilara inserted the key into the recess. A soft, muffled click echoed, and the chest's lid sprang open, revealing its contents. There was no gold or jewels. Instead, the chest was filled with scrolls and documents, some sealed with ancient wax, others open with elegant calligraphy. On top, a silver medallion with the same crest as the key rested on a piece of faded silk. Ilara picked it up, feeling the cold weight of the metal. The crest was unmistakable. That of her own family, a symbol she had seen in old stories, but which she thought had been lost. An overwhelming emotion took hold of Ilara. It wasn't just a material treasure, it was the confirmation of a lineage, a link to a noble past she had never imagined. Her eyes welled up. Leo and Clara, her grandchildren. They were not just orphans in misery, they were heirs to a history, to a dignity that time had tried to erase. Clara's fever, Leo's hunger, all of it now seemed like a challenge she was destined to overcome. That chest, that chamber, were more than a discovery, they were a promise. The promise that her family's resilience would be rewarded. She needed to understand what was written there, to unravel every secret, to secure the future of her little ones. Ilara needed to understand what was written there, to unravel every secret, to secure the future of his little ones. With the silver medallion still in his trembling hands, he felt the weight of history and responsibility. His eyes, which had seen so much disillusionment, now shone with an almost frightening hope. Leah and Kiro, his grandchildren, depended on him for everything, and that chamber, that chest, were the promise that misery would not be the end of his lineage. He carefully placed the medallion on the dusty oak table and with a deep sigh began to examine the scrolls. The light from the skylight, now intensifying with the advancing morning, illuminated the elegant yet ancient calligraphies that adorned the yellowed papers. The language was formal, full of terms Ilaro barely understood, and the faded ink made reading an even greater challenge for his tired eyes. He felt a pang of frustration, the urgency of his grandchildren contrasting with the slowness required to decipher those mysteries. With patience, Ilaro separated the documents. There were land records, detailed family trees, and ancient correspondences. Each piece seemed like a fragment of a giant puzzle. He felt the presence of his ancestors, the strength of a family that, despite adversities, had left a legacy. His wrinkled fingers brushed against a scroll that seemed different from the others. It was sturdier, with an intact wax seal, though cracked by time, and a dark silk ribbon that kept it rolled. There was something about it that called to him, a feeling that this was the most important document. With almost reverent care, Ilaro broke the seal and unrolled the scroll. The calligraphy was clearer, and the text, though formal, seemed more direct. His eyes scanned the lines, and he felt his heart quicken as the words began to make sense. It wasn't just a story, it was a testament from a distant ancestor, a Lord Alaric, who had foreseen times of turbulence and misery for his family. He had established a fund, a treasure of resources, not of gold and jewels, but of productive lands and investments, carefully hidden and managed by a lineage of trusted guardians. The document detailed that access to this fund would only be granted to the legitimate heir who, in times of extreme need, found the secret passage and the chest. The mansion, which seemed like a curse, was in fact the first key. The key Ilaro had found was for the chest, and the medallion was proof of his identity. But there was more. The testament instructed the heir to look for a specific inscription in the mansion's chapel, which would reveal the location and name of the fund's last guardian. Ilaro felt the air thin in his lungs. It was not a vague promise of a noble past. It was a concrete path to redemption. Lord Alaric had not only left a material treasure, but also a testament of faith in his family's resilience, a hope planted centuries ago. His eyes welled up, not with sadness, but with overwhelming gratitude. Kiro's fever, Leah's hunger, all of it could come to an end. Prosperity was not just assured, it was waiting for them, a living legacy that only needed to be activated. A mix of relief and a new wave of apprehension washed over him. The task was monumental, but the reward was the future of his grandchildren. He needed to return to Leah and Kiro, but now with a new mission, one that would demand all his strength and wisdom. The mansion was no longer a decrepit refuge, but a map, a guide to a future he barely dared to dream of. He pressed the scroll against his chest, feeling the warmth of the promise it contained. Ilaro remained there for a long moment, the scroll still pressed against his chest, as if his very life depended on that yellowed piece of paper. Lord Alaric's words echoed in his mind, a whisper from centuries past that promised redemption. His eyes, once tear-filled with an almost painful gratitude, now fixed on the light filtering from the skylight, a ray of hope that extended to the heart of the chamber. The deep breath he took seemed to fill his lungs, not just with air, but with renewed purpose. He was no longer just an elderly widower, dragging himself through life with the weight of loss and misery. He was the guardian of a legacy, the bridge to Leah and Kiro's future. Carefully, He folded the scroll and placed it with the silver medallion inside the chest, which he then relocked with the ornate key. That treasure was not to be displayed, but kept, protected, until the right moment arrived. Before leaving, Ilaro cast one last look at the chamber, absorbing every detail: the dusty books, the imposing table, the reverent silence. It was a sanctuary of secrets, a testament to his family's persistence. He knew he would return, but now the priority was different. He needed to go back to his grandchildren. With the lantern in one hand and the chest key in the other, Ilaro backed out through the ajar door, closing it softly behind him. The narrow, dark passage seemed less frightening now, illuminated by the flame of hope in his chest. He crawled back with surprising agility for his age, driven by the urgency to see Leah and Cairo. The smell of mold and earth no longer bothered him. He felt only the aroma of a possible future. Emerging from the crack in the wall, Ilaro found himself back in the main hall. The daylight, still faint, entered through the high windows, painting the stone floor with grey tones. His eyes immediately sought the spot where he had left the children. There they were, nestled under the wool blanket, still asleep. Leah, with a slightly less flushed face, and Cairo, with softer breathing. A wave of love and relief washed over him, making his knees weaken. He approached slowly, kneeling beside them. With a tender gesture, Ilaro touched Leah's forehead. The fever seemed to have subsided a little more, an encouraging sign. Cairo stirred, slowly opening his eyes. "Grandpa," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Ilaro smiled, a tired smile but full of a new light. "Grandpa's here." Cairo snuggled closer, feeling the warmth of Ilaro's hand. "Where were you?" Ilaro hesitated. How to explain to such a small boy the magnitude of what he had discovered? "I went to explore a little more, my little one, to look for more things to help us." He couldn't tell them everything yet. The responsibility of protecting that secret, of fully unraveling it before sharing the hope, was a burden he needed to carry alone for now. "We still have some dried apples and nuts, if you want," he offered, feeling his own hunger, but prioritizing theirs. Leah whimpered, opening her eyes too. Ilaro helped her sit up a little, offering her a piece of apple. She chewed slowly, her sleepy eyes fixed on him. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" Leah's innocent question struck Ilaro deeply. Was he okay? He was exhausted, overwhelmed, but also filled with an iron determination. "I am, my dear, now that I've found something that will give us much hope." He couldn't lie completely. The hope was real. He needed to find the chapel, decipher the inscription, and find the guardian. The mansion, once a labyrinth of despair, was now a map to a future he barely dared to dream of. He hugged them, feeling the warmth of their small bodies, the promise of a future he would fight to build. Ilaro hugged them tightly, feeling the warmth of their small bodies, the promise of a future he would fight to build. The smell of smoke and mold, once so oppressive, now seemed to mingle with the sweet aroma of hope. Leah and Cairo, still sleepy, nestled in his arms, their childlike trust a balm to his tired soul. He knew he couldn't postpone the search for the chapel for long, but the immediate priority was his grandchildren's health and comfort. With a soft sigh, Ilaro released them, observing their faces. Leah still had a faint blush on her cheeks, but the fever seemed to be subsiding. Cairo, more awake, rubbed his eyes. "Grandpa, I'm hungry again," he said in a whiny voice. Ilaro smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, now less clouded by hopelessness. "I know, my little one. Let's see what else we can find." He stood up, feeling his joints protest. But his determination was stronger than the pain. The small leather pouch with dried apples and nuts was almost empty. He needed to find more food, more water. The chapel and the guardian were the key to prosperity, but daily survival was the constant battle. As Leah and Cairo nibbled on the last portions, Ilaro observed the hall. The tapestry that hid the secret passage was back in place, a silent secret between him and the ancient walls. He couldn't risk the children in their natural curiosity finding the entrance. The weight of responsibility on his shoulders seemed to grow with each passing moment. "Grandpa, can we explore the mansion a bit?" Kiro asked, his eyes shining with returning energy. Leah, weaker, just watched, but there was a silent expectation in her gaze. Ilaro hesitated. The mansion was vast, full of unknown dangers, but it was also where the chapel was hidden. He needed to start looking, and perhaps the children's company with their innocence could even be a disguise for his true mission. "Yes, my loves, but we have to stay together, always holding hands, and we can't go too far without Grandpa, right?" Kiro's eyes widened with joy. "Right, Grandpa," Leah offered a weak smile. Ilaro helped them stand. Leah's steps were still uncertain, and Ilaro took her hand, while Kiro held the other. Together they began to explore the corridors adjacent to the main hall. The daylight, though still diffuse, allowed them to see a little more than the previous night. The walls were covered with dark wooden panels, many of them rotted, and the air was heavy with the smell of dampness and abandonment. Ilaro guided his grandchildren carefully, his eyes scrutinizing every corner, every door, searching for any sign that might indicate the location of a chapel. He knew that medieval chapels were usually integrated into the main structure or close to it. They passed through empty rooms, with cold fireplaces and broken windows that let in gusts of icy wind. Kiro pointed at shadows and cobwebs, transforming fear into adventure. Leah, quieter, clung to Ilaro's hand, but the curiosity in her eyes was evident. He stopped before a particularly large and ornate door with carvings that seemed to represent religious figures, though worn by time. Ilaro's heart leapt. Could this be it? He pushed the door, which creaked in protest, revealing an even larger hall, with a vaulted ceiling and dark, stained glass windows, though many were broken. At the far end, a collapsed stone altar. It was the chapel. Ilaro felt a shiver run down his spine. That was the next step. He looked at Leah and Kiro, their small, hopeful faces. The search for the inscription would begin now. He needed to be discreet, but urgent. The chapel was imposing, even in ruins. The light filtering through the broken stained glass windows created a mosaic of pale colors on the dusty floor. Ilaro guided the children to a wooden bench that was still standing, though unstable. "Stay here, my little ones. Grandpa is going to look for something." He couldn't explain to them the importance of that place, nor the urgency of his mission. His eyes scanned the walls, searching for the inscription mentioned in the scroll. The task was arduous, the chapel was large, and every stone seemed to guard its own secret. He felt the weight of time and history, but also the strength of love for his grandchildren, which propelled him with every step. He needed to find that inscription, not just for them, but to honor Lord Alaric's legacy. Hope now was a beacon guiding him through the darkness. Ilaro, his heart pulsing a melody of urgency and reverence, began his search. His eyes scanned the chapel walls, every stone, every crack, every faded remnant of fresco. The silence of the place was broken only by the rustle of his clothes and the soft breathing of Leah and Kiro, who nestled on the bench, watching him with childlike curiosity. He knew the inscription wouldn't be obvious, not after centuries of oblivion. Lord Alaric would have hidden it wisely, to be found only by those who truly deserved it, by those willing to fight. The pale morning light, filtered through the broken stained glass windows, danced in the dust, revealing details that the previous night's darkness had hidden. Ilaro walked slowly around the chapel's perimeter, running his wrinkled fingers over the cold stones. He sought a pattern, a symbol, anything that aligned with his family's crest or the words of the Testament. The walls were adorned with worn sculptures of saints and angels, whose faces had been corroded by time, making them almost unrecognizable. "Grandpa, what are you looking for?" Kiro asked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Leah, her head resting on her brother's shoulder, merely watched him, her eyes wide and attentive. Ilaro turned, offering them a reassuring smile. "I'm looking for a story, my little ones, an ancient story that can help us greatly." He couldn't give them details, but the truth in his words was undeniable. The hope he felt was palpable. He knelt before the collapsed altar, feeling the roughness of the stone beneath his hands. The altar was the heart of the chapel, the focal point. If there was an inscription, it was likely to be there or nearby. With the lantern, which he still held, he illuminated every inch of the stone, searching for marks, carvings, anything. Time had been cruel, and moss and dirt covered many of the surfaces. Frustration began to set in. His tired eyes ached from the effort. He stood up, massaging his temple. Leah coughed softly, and Ilaro felt a pang in his chest. Her fever had subsided, but the girl was still weak. He couldn't waste time. His eyes fixed on an area of the wall behind the altar, where a large, almost completely faded fresco seemed to depict a battle scene. Below it, a series of small stones formed an unusual pattern. They were not common building stones. They seemed to have been carefully fitted together. Ilaro approached, his heart beating faster. He ran his hand over them, feeling a subtle difference in texture. One of the stones seemed slightly more prominent than the others. With extreme care, Ilaro tried to push it. It didn't yield. He tried to turn it, but also without success. Cairo, noticing his grandfather's concentration, got down from the bench and approached, his curious eyes fixed on the wall. "What is that, Grandpa?" "I don't know, my little one. But I feel it's important," Ilaro replied, his voice low and thoughtful. He stepped back a little, looking at the stone pattern from a different angle. There was something about it, an asymmetry that seemed intentional. Suddenly, the memory of his family's crest, the one on the key and the medallion, flashed in his mind. He knelt again, mentally comparing the crest with the stone pattern. Yes, there was a subtle resemblance, a stylization that could easily be overlooked. He touched the stone that had stood out again, and then noticed a small, almost imperceptible indentation beside it, almost like a socket. With renewed breath, Ilaro took out the silver medallion he had kept in his pocket. The medallion's crest was identical to what he was imagining. With trembling hands, he tried to fit the medallion into the indentation. A soft, almost inaudible click echoed through the chapel. The protruding stone receded slightly, and a small crack opened, revealing a dark space behind it. Ilaro felt a thrill of emotion. He had found it. It wasn't the complete inscription, but the place where it was hidden. His love for his grandchildren, the promise of a future, all of it materialized in that small space. He looked at Cairo, who watched him with wide eyes, and at Leah, who was now struggling to sit up and see. Hope had transformed into a vibrant certainty. He was on the right path. Ilaro, his heart racing, carefully moved the stone aside, revealing a narrow, dark niche. The lantern in his trembling hand illuminated the interior, and his eyes, which had seen so much darkness, now fixed on something that radiated its own light, even in the gloom. It was not gold, nor jewels, but something far more valuable. An ancient bronze plaque, embedded in the stone wall with elegant and profound calligraphy. The letters, though ancient, were surprisingly clear. Protected by the seal of time and stone, he knelt, ignoring the pain in his knees, and ran his fingers over the cold bronze surface. Kiro, with childlike curiosity, tried to peek over his grandfather's shoulder, but Ilaro gently moved him away. Leah, still on the bench, watched the scene with a mix of weariness and fascination. Ilaro began to read in a low voice, Lord Alaric's testament words echoing in his mind. The inscription read, "He who, through love and resilience, unveils the veils of time, shall find in Seraphina, the guardian of light, the bridge to the legacy. Her abode is the house of the setting sun, beyond the stone bridge that crosses the grey river in the village of Eldoria. May faith guide your steps and hope illuminate your path." Every word was a balm to his soul, a confirmation that his struggle was not in vain. Seraphina, the guardian of light, the house of the setting sun, Eldoria. Names that were once mere echoes of a distant past now became points on a map, a clear path to redemption. Ilaro felt a solitary tear roll down his wrinkled face, not from sadness, but from deep and overwhelming gratitude. It was as if Lord Alaric, across the centuries, was there reaching out to him. He turned to Cairo, who looked at him with wide eyes. "Grandpa, what is it?" Ilaro smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face. "It's the answer, my little one, the answer to all our prayers." He couldn't explain Seraphina, the legacy, the prosperity, but he could share the hope. "We found someone who will help us greatly, Cairo. Someone who knows our family's history and has something very important for us." Leah, who had slowly approached, leaning on her brother, touched Ilaro's hand. "Will we be okay, Grandpa?" Her voice was weak, but filled with renewed hope. Ilaro pulled her into a tight hug, feeling the fragility of her small body. "Yes, my flower. We will be okay, better than you can imagine." He kissed the top of her head, smelling her fine hair. Leah's fever, though diminished, was still a constant worry, and Kiro's hunger, a painful reminder of their vulnerability. But now there was a path. He stood up, the bronze plaque still shining in his mind. The village of Eldoria was not so far, he knew. It was a small community on the banks of the Grey River, known for its stone houses and ancient bridge, the house of the setting sun. He needed to plan, to be cautious, but the urgency was palpable. "We need to prepare, my little ones," Ilaro said, his voice firm and full of new determination. "We'll eat what we have, and then we'll begin a small journey." Cairo jumped with joy. "An adventure, Grandpa." Ilaro nodded, a sparkle in his eyes. "Yes, Ciro, the greatest adventure of our lives, one that will lead us to a future of light and hope." He knew the journey would be arduous, especially with the children and Leah's health, but Seraphina's promise, the guardian of light, was a beacon guiding him. He closed the niche with the stone, protecting the secret, and took his grandchildren's hands, feeling the strength of the human connection that bound them. The mansion, once a symbol of despair, was now the starting point for a new beginning. Ilaro closed the niche with the stone, protecting the secret, and took his grandchildren's hands, feeling the strength of the human connection that bound them. The mansion, once a symbol of despair, was now the starting point for a new beginning. The sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple as Ilaro and the children left the chapel. He felt the morning cold bite his skin, but the warmth of hope in his heart was stronger, warming him from within. They needed to prepare. With the few remaining dried apples and nuts and a small amount of water he had found in an almost empty barrel, Ilaro made a frugal meal for them. Leah ate slowly, still pale, but Cairo devoured his portion with the renewed energy of a child, his eyes shining with the promise of an adventure. "Shall we take the blanket, Grandpa?" Cairo asked, pointing to the wool blanket. Ilaro nodded with a tired smile. "Yes, my little one, and the lantern too. We don't know what we'll find on the way." He tied the blanket to his back, feeling the added weight, but knowing it was essential for the cold nights to come. The journey to Eldoria would be challenging, especially with Leah still weak. He picked her up for a moment, feeling her light, fragile body, his heart aching with worry. "Can you walk a little, my flower?" he asked, kissing her forehead. Leah nodded with a faint smile. "Yes." "Grandpa, I'm strong for you." They left the mansion, the wooden door creaking a melancholic farewell. Ilaro cast one last look at the imposing structure, now seen in a new light. It was no longer a refuge of misery, but the cradle of a new chance, a beacon from a past that stretched into the future. The path was a narrow, uneven trail, covered with stones and roots clinging to the earth. Ilaro held Ciero's hand firmly, while Leah struggled to keep up, her steps faltering. He picked her up whenever he noticed her fatigue, feeling the strain in his own aged muscles, but determination propelled him. The wind blew cold, and Ilaro tightened the blanket around Leah, protecting her from the biting chill. "Grandpa, is it much further?" Ciero asked after hours, his voice already with a trace of impatience and weariness. His curious eyes, once full of adventure, now showed a little fatigue. "Not much, my little one. We're getting close to the Grey River," Ilaro replied, pointing to a dark line of trees on the horizon. The mention of the river brought a new breath of hope to Ilaro, a concrete landmark. The scroll spoke of the stone bridge that crossed it. The landscape was desolate, open fields and trees twisted by the relentless wind. The sun was already beginning to set, tinging the sky with reddish and purple hues, when they spotted the river. Its waters were a greyish-green, reflecting the cloudy sky and the melancholy of the day's end. And there it was, the stone bridge, ancient and robust, like an honourable scar on the landscape, a witness to centuries. Ilaro felt a lump in his throat, a mix of relief and apprehension. They were on the right path. They crossed the bridge, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the damp stones, a rhythm that seemed to announce a new era. On the other side, a more defined trail led to a small rise. And there, nestled among the trees, Eldoria appeared. It was a modest village, with stone houses and thatched roofs, smoke rising from some chimneys, a comforting sign of life and human warmth. Ilaro's heart beat faster, a drum of hope. He had arrived. Guided by intuition and the words of the inscription, he looked for a house that could be the house of the setting sun. There was one, a little set apart from the others, with a facade that seemed to capture the last rays of the setting sun, tinging its walls with a soft, welcoming golden hue. It was larger than the others, with a small garden, even if it was now covered in snow and weeds, promising beauty in spring. Ilaro stopped before the dark wooden door, his breath caught in his throat. Leah and Ciero, exhausted, looked at the house with curiosity, their small faces reflecting the dying light. The moment was solemn, laden with centuries of expectations and the promise of a future. He raised his hand, feeling the weight of the decision, his family's future hanging on a simple gesture. With a heart beating like a drum, Ilaro knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the twilight silence, a call to destiny. The sound of Ilaro's knock echoed, a call to destiny, and the silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Then the door creaked softly and opened. An elderly woman, with silver hair tied in an elegant braid and deep blue eyes that radiated serene calm, appeared on the threshold. Her clothes were simple but impeccable, and a comforting warmth seemed to emanate from her. She looked at Ilaro, at Leah, who nestled exhausted beside her grandfather, and at Ciero, who watched her with a mix of weariness and childlike curiosity. Her eyes lingered on the medallion Ilaro still wore, visible beneath his tunic. A soft, welcoming smile formed on her lips. "Ilaro of Alaric," she said, her voice a melodious yet firm whisper, "I have been expecting you. And you, Leah. And you, Ciero." She extended a wrinkled, inviting hand. "Come in, my dears. The night's cold is no place for you." Ilaro felt his legs weaken with relief. It was her, Seraphina, the guardian of light. He swallowed hard, words caught in his throat, and simply nodded, guiding his grandchildren inside. The House of the Setting Sun was a refuge of warmth and light. A fireplace crackled cheerfully in the center of the main room, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls and polished wooden furniture. The smell of fresh bread and herbs hung in the air, an aroma that made Ilaro's stomach rumble and Cairo's eyes widen. Serafina led them to a sturdy wooden table, already set with bowls of steaming soup and slices of bread. "Please sit. You must be exhausted and hungry." She looked at Leah, whose cheeks were still pale, "And you, my little one, need rest and warmth." As Leah and Cairo devoured the soup with an eagerness that broke Ilaro's heart, Serafina watched him with a kindness he hadn't seen in years. "The scroll guided you here, didn't it, Ilaro?" she asked, her voice soft. Ilaro, his mouth full of bread, nodded. "Yes, Lady Serafina, the inscription in the chapel. It brought me." Serafina smiled. "I am the last of the line of guardians. My purpose is to ensure that Lord Alaric's legacy is delivered to its true heir. And you, Ilaro, are that heir. Your resilience, your love for your grandchildren, all of it has been tested and proven." She gestured towards a carved wooden chest in the corner of the room. "The treasure and the documents that reveal your family's true history are kept there. They not only ensure a future of prosperity, but also restore the honor and name of your lineage." Serafina's words were a balm to Ilaro's soul. The weight of years of misery, sleepless nights, and constant worry for Leah and Cairo's future began to dissipate. Tears of gratitude welled in his eyes, flowing freely down his wrinkles. He had succeeded. They were saved. "But most importantly," Serafina continued, her eyes fixed on Ilaro's grandchildren, "is that you have found a home, a place where love and security can flourish. The House of the Setting Sun is now your home, Ilaro, and Lord Alaric's legacy is not just wealth, but the promise of a dignified life, of education for the children, of healing for the sick." Leah, who had finished her soup, leaned her head on Ilaro's shoulder, a faint smile on her lips. "We're safe, Grandpa," she murmured, and Ilaro felt the warmth of her small body, now less feverish. Cairo, his mouth smudged with soup, looked at Serafina with admiration. Ilaro hugged his grandchildren, feeling the warmth of their bodies, the promise of a future he would fight to build. The ruined mansion, the hunger, the cold, Leah's illness, all seemed distant, like a nightmare from which they had finally awakened. The greatest wealth was not just in the treasure, but in the human connection that had guided them, in the unwavering faith and hope that, against all odds, had prevailed. The resolution of their conflicts was not merely material, but the restoration of their dignity, the healing of their wounds, and the certainty that love, indeed, was the most powerful light. Ilaro, his heart still racing, could barely process the magnitude of Serafina's words. The carved wooden chest seemed to radiate its own light, and he approached it with reverence, feeling his hands tremble. Serafina, with a gentle smile, gestured, inviting him to open it. With a soft click, the lid lifted, revealing not only gold coins and jewels that gleamed discreetly in the gloom, but stacks of ancient scrolls, wax seals, and a leather-bound book, his family crest engraved on the cover. Ilaro's eyes filled with tears again. It wasn't just the material wealth that moved him, but the tangible proof of his history, the validation of a lineage he thought had been forgotten and dishonored. He picked up one of the scrolls, his wrinkled fingers brushing against the ancient letters, and felt a deep connection to his ancestors. Leah, more recovered, and Cairo, with childlike curiosity, approached, peeking at the chest's contents. "This book," Serafina said, pointing to the leather volume, "contains the complete history of your family, Ilaro. The lands that were taken from them, the injustices suffered, and irrefutable proof of their nobility. The other documents are property titles and letters of credit that ensure the restoration of your name and the prosperity that is rightfully yours." Ilaro couldn't speak, only nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He looked at Leah, who now had a different sparkle in her eyes, and at Cairo, who was already dreaming of the books and education Serafina had promised. The promise of healing for Leah, of a dignified life, of a future without the shadow of hunger and cold, was the true treasure. In the days that followed, the House of the Setting Sun became a true home. Serafina, with her wisdom and kindness, guided Ilaro through the documents, explaining every detail of Alaric's legacy. She provided warm clothes, nutritious meals, and most importantly, a village doctor who cared for Leah with dedication. The girl's fever gradually subsided, and her pale cheeks began to regain color. She laughed more, played with Kiro in the garden, now free from the constant threat of illness. Cairo, in turn, was amazed by the books Serafina possessed. He spent hours leafing through the pages, absorbing the stories and knowledge that had previously been denied to him. Serafina, with patience, began to teach him to read and write, and the boy's eyes shone with a thirst for learning. Ilaro watched his grandchildren, his heart overflowing with a joy he thought he would never feel again. The ruined mansion, the biting cold, the hopelessness that had consumed them, all seemed like a distant nightmare. The greatest wealth Ilaro had found was not just in gold or titles, but in the restoration of his dignity, Leah's healing, Kiro's education, and the certainty that love and resilience had prevailed. The human connection with Serafina, the guardian of light, had been the bridge to this new life, a testament that kindness still existed, even in a merciless world. Ilaro, Leah, and Kiro not only recovered their legacy, but built a future. The House of the Setting Sun, bathed in the last golden rays of the sun, became a beacon of hope, a reminder that, in the depths of history and human resilience, the greatest wealth awaits those who refuse to give up. Love, after all, was the most powerful light, capable of transforming misery into prosperity and despair into a radiant future. They were finally at peace. They were finally at peace. The House of the Setting Sun, once merely a name on a scroll, now flourished as the pulsating heart of their new life. Days unfolded at a gentle, welcoming pace, vastly different from the brutality they had known. Ilaro awoke with the first rays of sun, no longer to the biting cold or the anxiety of hunger, but to the smell of baking bread and the joyful murmur of Leah and Cairo. Serafina, with her quiet wisdom, became more than a guardian. She was a grandmother to Ilaro's grandchildren, a friend and counselor to him, her deep blue eyes always radiating serene calm. Leah, now fully recovered, was an explosion of energy and curiosity. Her rosy cheeks and bright eyes were a testament to the health and security she had found. She spent mornings in the garden, even in winter, watching the first snowmelt sprouts, imagining the flowers to come. Serafina taught her about medicinal herbs and the stories of Eldoria's ancient inhabitants, and Leah absorbed every word with childlike fascination, her small fingers tracing the textures of dried leaves. Cairo, in turn, was immersed in the world of books. The small library of the House of the Setting Sun, once an unthinkable luxury, was now his refuge. He learned to read and write with impressive speed, his small hands tracing the letters with dedication. Ilaro saw him daydreaming about maps and legends and knew that Kiro's future would be one of knowledge and discoveries. Ilaro, in turn, felt the weight of the years dissipate from his shoulders. His shoulders, once bowed by the burden of misery, now rose with renewed dignity. He spent afternoons in the village, talking with other residents, sharing his story, and offering help whenever he could. Lord Alaric's documents not only restored his fortune, but also his family's honor, and Elaro used his new position for the good of the community. He helped organize food distribution for the needy, supported local artisans, and advocated for justice for those who, like him, had been forgotten. The ruined mansion, once a symbol of his downfall, was sold, and part of the proceeds was allocated to building a small school in Eldoria, a place where all children could learn, regardless of their origin. The House of the Setting Sun, with its always lit fireplace and the aroma of warm meals, became a beacon of hope for the entire village. Its doors were always open to anyone who needed advice, a bowl of soup, or simply a moment of human warmth. Elaro, with his grandchildren by his side, had found true wealth, not gold, but the ability to love, to care, and to build a better future for everyone. He looked at Leah, who now laughed loudly as she helped Serafina prepare dinner, and at Cairo, who read a book with deep concentration, and his heart filled with an unshakable peace. The journey had been long and full of trials, but every step, every sacrifice had been worth it. His love for his grandchildren, his resilience in the face of adversity, his faith in a better future, all of it had been the true compass that guided him. The story of Elaro, Leah, and Cairo was a living testament that, even in the darkest ages, the light of hope never fades. Human connection, altruism, and the pursuit of justice were the pillars of their new existence. The House of the Setting Sun, bathed in the last golden rays of the sun, was not just a dwelling, but an eternal symbol that the greatest wealth lies in the ability to transform misery into prosperity, and despair into a radiant future, where love, after all, was the most powerful light.